Welcome to Cosmic Tales Bonus, where we step back from the individual constellations and look at the bigger picture. Different cultures, same stars, completely different meanings, every single time. I'm Diana, and let's get into it. Tonight, 4 traditions that didn't make it into the main episodes, not because they weren't good enough, because the episodes were already full. We start in the Great Lakes with a constellation that doesn't just appear in winter, it is winter. And the one creature who defeated it, spoiler, is not who you'd expect. The Greeks looked at these stars and saw Orion, the hunter, the belt, the whole dramatic mythology. The Ojibwe looked at the exact same stars and saw something more important, the person responsible for winter. His name is Bibun Keonini, the winter maker. Depending on translation, his name means either winter maker or north wind. Either way, if you have ever been outside in January wondering whose idea all of this was, the Ojibwe had someone specific in mind. And he is bigger than Orion. His arms stretch wide across the sky, all the way to Aldebaran in Taurus on one side, Procyon and Canis Minor on the other. He is not hunting anything, he is not chasing anyone. He is embracing winter itself. And he keeps remarkable time. Late November, he climbs into the evening sky. December and January, he stands high overhead, ruling the longest nights of the year. Then, as spring approaches, he slowly slips toward the western horizon and disappears. Nobody seems particularly sorry to see him go. For the Ojibwe people of the Great Lakes, this wasn't poetry. It was practical. Winter was beautiful sometimes. It brought people together indoors. It was a season of storytelling, of repairing the tools that survival depended on. But it could also kill you. And the winter maker was the reason. It froze the lakes, buried the trails, turned simple tasks into hard work. But it also gathered families together. It was the reason for repairing tools, sharing meals, telling stories beside a warm fire while the wind howled outside. The winter maker ruled over all of it, which makes what happened next even better. Because the one creature who finally defeated winter was not an eagle, not a bear, not some legendary warrior armed with a magical spear. It was a duck. Shingabis was a small diving duck, the kind that disappears beneath the water to hunt for fish. When winter arrived and every other bird sensibly flew south, Shingabis stayed exactly where he was. Every morning, gather firewood, keep the fire going, walk out onto the frozen lake, find where the reeds poked through the ice, peck a hole open, dive, catch fish, go home for dinner. Not exciting, but it worked. The winter maker watched this with growing irritation. He had frozen the lakes, driven away the birds, buried the land under snow. Everyone else had understood that winter was supposed to be hard, except this duck. Every single day, Shingabis went about his business as though winter were little more than a scheduling inconvenience. The winter maker couldn't understand it. Why isn't he cold, he wondered. Why does he look so perfectly content? So he escalated. The north wind howled harder than it ever had. Snow buried the forests. The cold became so fierce that breathing outside hurt. Shingabis caught his fish, added another log to the fire, went to bed. The winter maker decided there was only one thing left to do. He would visit the duck himself. That evening, he arrived at Shingabis's lodge. Even before the door opened, the duck knew who was outside. He could feel the cold coming through the walls. Shingabis was sitting beside the fire, eating fish, telling stories, singing to himself. The winter maker entered and sat down across from him. Shingabis acted as though no one was there. He got up, He took his poker, stirred the fire so it burned brighter and hotter, still telling his stories, still singing his songs, not a single word to his guest. The lodge grew warm, then hot. Beads of sweat began rolling down the Wintermaker's forehead, dripping from his frost-white hair and hissing into the ashes at his feet. The Wintermaker, the North Wind himself, sweating in a duck's lodge while his host pointedly ignored him. He couldn't take it. He shoved past the door and stormed back out into the night, and then, furious, stamped the snow so hard it turned to solid ice beneath him. If Shingebis wouldn't be driven out by cold, he'd be dragged out by force. The Wintermaker called into the dark and challenged Shingebis to come outside and wrestle, right there on the frozen ground. Now, pause on that for a second. The North Wind, the being who freezes lakes and drives every bird from the sky, has just challenged a duck to a wrestling match. Shingebis said yes. He stepped out into the freezing night and grappled with the North Wind for hours, neither one giving an inch, until at last it was the Wintermaker whose grip began to weaken, whose breath grew ragged, who staggered back across the ice, beaten by a duck. He turned and fled north, back to his own country, leaving Shingebis still laughing behind him. The Wintermaker wasn't finished. He made the ice thicker than it had ever been, determined to starve the duck out by one last desperate measure. Shingebis kept pulling up frozen roots and diving for fish anyway. And at last the Wintermaker gave up entirely, withdrew to the far north. The weather warmed, the birds returned. The Wintermaker is not evil. The Ojibwe tradition is clear about that. He is simply winter doing what winter does, and the stories about him are ultimately stories about surviving it, about the small, stubborn, warm fire-keeping part of us that refuses to be defeated by the cold. He is still out there every November, still climbing into the evening sky, still keeping his remarkable schedule. And somewhere below, at least in the story, a small duck is still catching his fish. Our next tradition takes something dangerous and goes much further with it. Half a world away, several thousand years earlier, the Egyptians were dealing with a creature considerably smaller than winter, and for their children, considerably more deadly. The Greeks eventually put this creature in the sky as a killer, the monster that brought down the greatest hunter who ever lived. The Egyptians did something else entirely. They made it a goddess, and then they made her their doctor. One quick note before we go further. As far as anyone can tell, the Egyptians never connected the scorpion goddess directly to the stars we call Scorpius. They mapped the sky differently than the Greeks did. That's what makes this interesting, because the Egyptians weren't looking at the stars when they thought about scorpions. They were looking down at the desert floor, at the creature crawling through the sand toward their children's sandals. And they asked a different question than the Greeks did, and the answer was Serket. She is old, astonishingly old. So old that by the time the pyramids were being built, she had already been around for centuries. She reaches back into Egypt's pre-dynastic period, before hieroglyphs, before pharaohs, before anyone was writing history down at all. The Egyptians believed she was present at the creation of the world. What she did there, nobody remembered. Imagine being so ancient that your own origin story had been forgotten. That's Serket. Her name is more clever than it first appears. In Egyptian, it can be read two ways simultaneously: she who causes the throat to breathe, and she who tightens the throat. The same goddess, the same name, the sting and the cure held together. which is exactly the point. Scorpions weren't exotic creatures in ancient Egypt. They were roommates. You found them in sandals, under baskets, behind stones, in places where discovering one is an excellent way to ruin your morning. The Egyptians knew exactly what a sting could do. A healthy adult would probably survive. A child might not. The venom made breathing agonizing. So, instead of worshiping the creature that caused the problem, they worshiped the power that could reverse it. If Serket could take your breath away, she could surely give it back. She is usually shown as a beautiful woman with a scorpion resting on her head. But here's the detail worth noticing. The scorpion almost never has claws or a stinger. The danger has been disarmed, worn as a crown. The thing that frightened people became their protector. Serket also shows up in one of Egypt's greatest stories. After Osiris is murdered by his brother Set, Isis flees into the marshes, pregnant, vulnerable, hiding the future king of Egypt. Serket sends bodyguards, not soldiers, not lions, 7 scorpions. 3 scouts ahead, 2 on either side, 2 guarding the rear. It was, by any measure, an unusual traveling party. One evening, Isis disguised herself as a poor old woman and went looking for shelter. A wealthy noblewoman opened her door, saw a beggar surrounded by 7 scorpions, and slammed it shut. A poor woman nearby offered everything she had instead. The scorpions noticed. The fiercest one, Tefan, collected the venom of all 7 into a single sting, and that night slipped under the noblewoman's door and stung her young son. The child collapsed. His mother ran screaming into the streets. The person who heard her was the woman she had turned away. Isis could have kept walking. No one would have blamed her. Instead, she picked up the child, spoke the secret name of each scorpion, because in Egyptian magic, knowing a true name meant having power over it, and drew the poison from his body. The boy recovered. The story begins with venom and anger. It ends with mercy. Compassion stronger than poison. Healing having the final word. That's Serket's world. Venom wasn't simply destruction. It was a force that could be controlled, restrained, overcome. And it wasn't just mythology. It became medicine. Serket didn't have grand temples. She had physicians. The priests and priestesses who served her were healers, treating illness, caring for the sick, reciting spells over those suffering from stings and bites. They carried her name into the sick room, into the desert, into every place where something venomous had gotten the upper hand. Even in death, Serket kept watch. Her golden figure stood with outstretched arms in Tutankhamun's tomb, one of the 4 goddesses guarding the canopic jars, protecting the organs of the dead, watching over the journey into the afterlife, still protecting, still helping the throat breathe. Serket's story is ultimately an act of transformation, a civilization taking its most intimate danger and converting it into protection, into medicine, into breath. The scorpion that killed Egyptian children became the goddess who guarded them. Our next tradition performs no such transformation. It looks at the brightest star in the sky and tells the truth about something harder, that some wounds can't be reversed, that harm, once done, changes the world permanently. The Pawnee of the Great Plains trace their very ancestry to the stars, and the story they attach to Sirius, the brightest star in the entire night sky, is one of the most morally complicated stories in all of astronomy. It's about what happens when someone is forgotten, and what it costs everyone when they are. The Pawnee were not a small or obscure people. Their traditional homeland stretched across what is now Nebraska and Kansas, and among them, The Skiddy band in particular held one of the most sophisticated astronomical traditions in North America. For the Skiddy Pawnee, the stars weren't decoration, they weren't backdrop, they were ancestors. Long before people walked the earth, the star powers were already shaping the world, guiding the seasons, watching over the living, deciding how things would go. So when the Skiddy looked at Sirius, the brightest star in the southern sky, they didn't see a dog. They didn't see a hunting companion. They saw the wolf star. And they told a story about how death entered the world. It begins, as so many stories do, with someone being left off the guest list. When the world was still being made, a great council was called. The animals gathered to decide how the earth should be ordered. Everyone was invited. Everyone except the wolf star. Why? The tradition simply says no one remembered. Imagine that, the brightest star in the southern sky, forgotten. The wolf star watched from a distance as everyone else helped shape the world. He said nothing, but he remembered. The council gave responsibility for the new world to a being called the storm that comes out of the west. Storm traveled across the earth carrying a whirlwind bag. Inside the bag were the first human beings. Each evening, Storm would stop to rest, let the people out. They'd make camp, hunt buffalo, eat together, then return to the bag before the journey continued. Everything had its proper order. The wolf star never forgot this light. He sent a gray wolf to follow Storm. The old stories never quite explain why. Curiosity, maybe. Resentment, almost certainly. The wolf found Storm asleep beside the whirlwind bag. He assumed it might contain something worth eating, which, as far as wolves are concerned, is a pretty practical working hypothesis. He grabbed the bag and ran. When he finally stopped and opened it, the first people poured out. They built their camp, then they looked around. No buffalo, no storm, no one to guide them. They realized what had happened. Frightened and angry, they chased the wolf down, and they killed him. When the storm that comes out of the west found them, he was heartbroken. By killing the wolf, he told them, "You have brought death among the people. That was never meant to happen." He didn't explain exactly why those two things were connected. He simply looked at the dead wolf and said, "Now death has entered the world." The old storytellers never paused to explain the logic. Perhaps they never needed to. Perhaps their audience already understood. Or perhaps that's the part the story leaves deliberately open, the mystery at the center that no explanation could improve. What matters is that from that moment, the world was different. Storm told them to skin the wolf and make a sacred bundle from its hide, so they would never forget. From that day forward, they would be known as the Skiddy Pawnee, the Wolf People. Their name became a memorial, an identity built around the world's first death. And above them all, the wolf star kept watching. You'd think, after everything, the story would end there. It doesn't. Even now, every single morning, the wolf star is playing tricks. The Skiddy called Sirius fools the wolves. It rises just before the morning star, just before dawn, and tricks the wolves into howling too early. The brightest star in the sky, forgotten at the beginning of the world, still causing trouble at the end of every night. As Sirius disappeared and returned each year, the Pawnee imagined the wolf traveling the Wolf Road, their name for the Milky Way, moving between this world and the next. The annual cycle of the star became a map of what death actually was, not an ending, but a journey. Not every Pawnee community told the story the same way. Among the Skiddy, Sirius was the wolf star. Other communities called it the coyote star instead. Same sky, same people, different conversations. After the Winter Maker, after Circuit, after the Wolf Star who carried death into the world, we end tonight with a mystery, or more precisely, the absence of one. Just beneath Orion's feet sits a small constellation called Lepus, the Hare, and for thousands of years, people have looked at it and apparently agreed on one thing. Well, it's definitely something. By now we've become accustomed to constellations arriving with baggage. Heroes, monsters, curses, family arguments, Zeus making another questionable decision. Lepus arrives with none of that. The Greeks placed a hare beneath Orion's feet, which makes perfect visual sense. Hunters generally have something to hunt, and then they stop talking about it. No explanation, no adventure, no tragic ending, no transformation into the stars. Just a hare. It is one of the few constellations in the sky that is essentially a picture without a plot. But that's only true if you're Greek. Travel east to ancient Babylon and those same stars become something entirely different. Not a hare, a rooster. Specifically, the rooster belonging to the divine herald, the messenger god who stood at the side of Orion himself. Because in the Babylonian sky, Orion wasn't a hunter at all. He was the true shepherd of Anu, a servant to the king of the gods. And walking just behind him in the stars we now call Lepus was his herald's bird, a rooster, there to announce the messenger's arrival the way roosters have always announced the arrival of something important. Instead of a hunter and his fleeing prey, a messenger and the bird that heralds his coming. Same stars, different animal, different relationship. Still no story. Then, centuries later, Arabian astronomers looked at those same 4 bright stars and saw camels. Not one camel, 4 of them, standing together at a river drinking. Many scholars believe the river they imagined was the Milky Way itself, stretched across the sky above the desert like a great celestial waterway. If you've ever watched animals gathering at a watering hole at dusk, you can see exactly why someone looking up might picture the same thing overhead. And that tradition survives directly in the stars' names. Nihal, one of the brightest stars in Lepus, comes from the Arabic word for the camels beginning to quench their thirst. Meanwhile, the constellation's brightest star, Arneb, simply means the hare. One tradition quietly sitting beside another, neither erasing the other, neither offering a story. So here we are, a hunter's hare, a herald's rooster, 4 thirsty camels at a cosmic river. 3 cultures, 3 completely different pictures. And not one of them thought to give us a story about any of it. We spend a lot of time in this series assuming that every constellation must hide some forgotten secret, a myth waiting to be recovered, a meaning waiting to be found. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes someone looked up at a handful of faint stars, said, "That looks like a hare." Everyone else shrugged, and the name stuck for 3,000 years. Maybe that's what Lepus has been teaching all along. Not every picture needs a plot. Not every star needs a hero. Not every patch of sky is waiting to tell you something profound. Sometimes the night sky is full of stories, and sometimes it's simply full of stars. This has been Cosmic Tales Bonus. Follow and subscribe wherever you listen, and find us on Instagram for images of everything we've talked about tonight, including the Wolf Road, which is just the Milky Way, and is one of the most beautiful names for it I've ever encountered. Until next time, keep looking up. Every star has a story waiting to be told, even the ones that don't.